Maybe it's worth laying out precisely your worldview as a kind of consciousness only worldview.
So in my view, all that exists are experiential states or mental states. I use these words as synonyms. Many people don't. That's why I make this disclaimer. All that exists are mental states, not your mental states alone, not my mental states alone. There are transpersonal mental states. So it is all experience. But experience has two perspectives. There is an intrinsic view to the experience, and there is an extrinsic appearance to the experience. Schopenhauer called it will and representation. Both are experiences, but they correlate with one another. For instance, if I feel fear while I'm lying in a functional MRI, the intrinsic view is the felt fear I have. The extrinsic appearance of that inner state, from the point of view of the neuroscientist looking at the monitor of the fMRI machine, will be certain patterns of brain activity. Now, those two are experiences. Experiences of the neuroscientist, experiences of the neurosurgeon, or whoever is taking a peek into the private world of your mental states. So it's only experiences, but experiences correlate across points of view. So there is a, quote, dualism of perspective, but not a dualism of substance.
A dualism of perspective, can you go into that a bit more deeply?
Yeah, so if I'm lying in the fMRI brain scanner and I feel fear, my perspective is a first-person perspective. But my experience from a first-person point of view presents itself to the neuroscientist looking at the fMRI monitor, presents itself to him in another way, because he has a second or third person perspective. So there are at least two perspectives. And I think that arises from dissociation, but now we're going to the detail. We have to explain why there are two perspectives. If everything is one universal mind, we cannot escape the need to explain why two perspectives arise in one mind. So of course I get to that. That's the meat of my ideas. But the fact that there are different perspectives, an inner perspective and an outer perspective, does not entail or imply substance dualism. There are no two substances. There is only one substance. There is only experience, but experience is perspectival.
I see. So the dualism is there's the experience of felt states, but there's also the experience of perceiving a world with structure. So which is kind of like saying physics is actually a perceptual act.
Physicists who think a little bit more deeply about what physics is, I will cite one specific example. André Linde wrote extensively about it. He insists physics is a science of perception. That's what it is. Let us not forget where we came from, how it all started. We start from perceptions. And then we start modeling the behavior of those perceptions. And then it becomes very convenient at some point to imagine that there is some underlying reality outside of us that would give us a way to think about why those perceptions are behaving this or that way. And we create some laws and so forth. But it all starts from perception. See, I don't reject that there is a world out there that we are all immersed in. That's why we describe our world in such a mutually consistent manner. I'm just saying that that world is not constituted by quantities, by something that is exhaustively defined in quantitative terms. I reject that, because then you face the hard problem. This world out there is constituted by transpersonal experiential states that present themselves to you according to what appears on the screen of perception. But perception is also mental. So there's mentality out there and mentality in here, and there's a correspondence between them, those two perspectives. But it's all mentality.
Would you say that your view is one of idealism, that only consciousness exists?
Right. That's right. Although I tend not to use the word idealism because through the history of philosophy, it's had a lot of associations that I'm not eager to participate in. It's had an anti-science flavor, for example. Berkeley, in some sense, proposed his version of idealism as a reaction against the successful mechanism of Newton, and in many cases, idealism has been an anti-science kind of thing, and never been proposed in a mathematically rigorous fashion, right? I mean, I've never seen an idealist say, "Here's my theory of consciousness, and here's the mathematics of this." So the whole history of idealism is not something I want to be associated with. But yes, it's idealism in the sense, the precise sense that instead of taking space-time and its contents as fundamental, which is the foundation of the physicalist framework, I take consciousness, and by that I mean experiences, like the taste of a donut, the smell of coffee, experiences and experiencers, but not necessarily selves, just experiences and experiencers, maybe not self-aware experiencers, as fundamental. I'm trying to build a theory, a mathematical theory of what I mean by that. So I've proposed precise mathematics of what I mean by, what structure do experiences have, what structure do experiencers have, what is a self, can we construct selves dynamically out of experiences, and so forth. So it's absolutely idealism in that sense, but it's not the anti-science, the anti-rigor kind of idealism that's been around in the past. And so that's why I call it conscious realism, because there's another aspect to idealism that I want to walk away from. It's idealism is often taken as an anti-realist point of view, and I'm a scientific realist. I think it's a legitimate goal for scientific theories to try to be true to the world. I just don't think that they've succeeded, including my theory, right? So I'm a scientific realist. I think that's a legitimate goal, and I understand from epistemological issues that even if we succeed, we'll not know if we succeeded, right? The next experiment can show that you were wrong. So it's an interesting position that we're in. I think it's a legitimate goal to be realists, to try to come with true theories. On the other hand, I think we absolutely at every step have to be completely humble about our theories and say, despite all their strengths and successes, the next experiment could show that we're deeply wrong. And in fact, not to be afraid of that, but to be looking for that, right? As soon as you can get something that smashes your current theory, you should break out the champagne. We're about to learn something. So it may be hard for some people to understand that kind of attitude. I mean, don't you just want to know? Well, yes, but what also we understand that even if we happen to know the truth, we'll never know that we know the truth. We can't know, right? Because you just will never know that you haven't done the next experiment that will take it down. And so yeah, it is idealism in that sense, but I should say why. One reason why I'm going there, and why as a scientist, I think it's because it seems really, in some sense, sort of stupid. Why go there? I mean, science has been exceedingly successful. Physicalism has been unbelievably successful. We owe our standard of living today to a science that's based on physicalism. Space-time is fundamental, microphysical. We owe probably our very lives to that science. Right? But our best scientific theories, general relativity, quantum field theory, and evolution by natural selection, those three theories, all three of our best theories are clearly telling us that space-time is doomed. Space-time cannot be fundamental. In the case of general relativity and quantum field theory, it's the very notion of space-time falls apart when you try to measure its smaller and smaller levels, right? So the whole reductionist framework of most physicalist science, not all, but most, falls apart because the reduction has to stop at the Planck scale, roughly the Planck scale. You cannot continue to measure at smaller and smaller levels of precision in space and time. To do that, you need light to see smaller and smaller, right? You need light with higher and higher frequencies of wavelength, higher and higher frequencies, smaller wavelengths. And that means higher and higher energies. And the problem is that as you use higher and higher energies to probe smaller and smaller regions of space, eventually you get so much energy in a small amount of space that you create a black hole. And the very thing you're trying to study no longer exists. And if you try to get even more energy to look even harder, then the black hole just gets bigger. So it's that it's not that there are pixels of space-time, it's that space-time itself is not even a well-defined concept anymore. It ceases to exist. And so it cannot be fundamental. It's an emergent concept. And that is a showstopper, right? Space-time is not fundamental. Think about how important that is. Right now, our fundamental story from science is the Big Bang. Space-time was born 13.8 billion years ago. Everything that we know is things that happen inside space-time. The creation of particles, the annihilation of particles, quantum field, everything is defined on general relativity as a theory of space-time. Quantum field theory, the fields are defined over space and time, over space-time. And the work I've been doing is showing that evolution by natural selection also entails that space-time is doomed. It's a clear implication of evolution by natural selection that the probability is zero that our perceptions of space-time and physical objects in space-time reflects anything true about the structure of objective reality. Nothing. Space-time, according to evolution by natural selection and according to general relativity and quantum field theory, cannot be fundamental. Now, and if you can just Google it, it's not just me saying it. If you Google space-time is doomed, you will find videos by world-class scientists who will explain to you, in some of the videos are in language that is intended for a broad audience. They'll explain why it's over. Space-time has had a good run. It's been fabulous foundation for several centuries, at least since Newton, but it's over. And we're now looking for a new foundation outside of space-time from which space-time emerges. Space-time has to be emergent. And my work is trying to come up with a theory of consciousness as what's fundamental. Other scientists are looking for other things, like maybe quantum bits and quantum gates. Seth Lloyd at MIT has done that. Others like Nima or Connie Hamed at Princeton, Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, they're just following the math. They say, we don't know what this realm behind space-time is, but let's try to nail down mathematically what it looks like. There's things like Grassmannians and amplituhedron and positive geometries and permutations and associahedron. There's all these mathematical structures that they're just, but what those structures are about is not clear. But they're using mathematics as a flashlight into the dark beyond space-time to try to figure out what is this realm. And I'm using similar ideas, but a theory in which consciousness is fundamental. So if it works, it'll be a watershed in science. We will have to let go of space-time. And when you think about what it means to let go of space-time, it's profound. I mean, it means letting go of microphysical particles as fundamental reality. It means letting go of the reductionist paradigm. But the constraint on our deeper theory outside of space-time will have to be that whatever this deeper theory is, when we project it back into space-time, we better get quantum field theory, general relativity, and evolution by natural selection, and understand how space-time and these theories are limiting cases of this deeper, more profound theory. That's it. So there's a lot of fun work for young scientists. There's tremendous challenges and exploration ahead.
You seem to adopt a kind of consciousness-only ontology.
Yes, I would. I would suggest that even from a conventional materialistic perspective, whatever we are as a person or a body is a byproduct of or emerges from the universe. Therefore, whatever we are essentially must be the same as what the universe is essentially. After all, the universe gave birth to us. So even from a materialistic perspective, the idea that what we essentially are and what the universe essentially is it's obvious. It's so, of course, there we're in agreement. Where we may diverge is as to what the nature of this shared reality is. I would suggest that, having explored myself and discovered that consciousness is the essential, irreducible nature of myself, that's something I can verify in my own experience. Having agreed that whatever I essentially am must be the reality of whatever it is that gives birth to me as an apparent person, it's a small step from there to conclude that consciousness must therefore be the reality of the universe. So I would suggest that underlying the apparent multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, there is a single, infinite, and indivisible reality whose nature is spirit or consciousness. Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree that there's a single, indivisible reality, and that, as you say, we can extrapolate from ourselves that we are made of the same stuff as everything else in the universe. And I think that the slight difference would be, I guess, I would say, for me, I feel like the experiences we've been talking about shows me, rather than saying I am consciousness, I might say I am the fact of being as is known as in consciousness. So it's illuminated here by consciousness. But
well, okay, but then you posit that being is something known by consciousness. The being and consciousness are two different things. That's a problem. Can you say from your experience, I am?
I would be tempted to just say am or is, because of my predilection for the Buddhist approach.
Indulge me my Vedantic background and allow me to. Okay,
yes,
am, yes, but I am or am. In other words, you can assert the presence of your being.
Yeah, the presence of being.
The presence of being, perfect, not your being. You can assert the presence of being. There is, we could say, there is being. Yes, that's what, when I say I am, that's what those words mean. I'm asserting the fact of being. Yeah. Now, how is it possible for us to assert that there is being? We're not guessing it. We're not imagining it. We assert that there is being because we know it. It's our experience. There is being. Being is known. Yeah? Can we say being is known?
Mm-hmm.
The common way of, if you'll let me use the word I, everyone can say I am. The reason we can say I am is because I know that I am. Now, what is it that knows that I am or that there is being? Is the being that I am known by, or the being that is, or the being that I am, known by something other than itself? Or is it the being that I am that knows itself? In other words, when we say, I know that I am, is the I that I am a different I from the I that knows that I am? Or when we say, I know that I am, is it not the same I that I am that knows that I am?
I completely agree that it is. It's the same thing of being
there,
that knows
you
itself.
have to conclude, well, perfect. And therefore your distinction between consciousness and being is not valid.
I think
you cannot say that being is appearing in consciousness, because it contradicts what you've just agreed.
No, I think I would say that consciousness is not, you said, is it known by a separate thing? I would say consciousness is not a thing. It's a capacity or a property of being. Not all being, not a black hole or a supernova. But if
let's take that statement.
This little ripple.
Consciousness is a property of being. Let's just explore that statement. Consciousness is a property of being. In other words, consciousness is something that being has. Okay, if that is true, experientially, if that is consistent with the evidence of experience, you have to be able to produce being in the absence of consciousness and say, look, here is being before it has acquired consciousness. And now here is being with consciousness. And therefore it's reasonable to say consciousness is the property of being. Now, can you do that?
We can't do that because we're confined by our only being able to know what's in our own consciousness, right? So I can't show you the Big Bang and say, look at this non-conscious being because of the privacy of consciousness. So I agree that I can't do that, but I don't think it's because non-conscious being doesn't exist. I think it's just the way we're set up. I can't show you the consciousness or the lack of consciousness. You know, if this cup is a physical object that doesn't have consciousness, I can't show you its lack of consciousness in the same way I can't show you the presence of consciousness in my mind. So I feel we have to go beyond experience. It's not from experience that I conclude that I don't think, so the reason I guess I see consciousness as an emergent feature of reality isn't because my experience tells me so, but it's because as I interact with the world, I see the way that vision depends on eyes, which seem to be these physical things.
That's an interpretation. That's an interpretation that there are other interpretations. There are other possible interpretations that do not appeal to the belief in the existence of something outside consciousness from which consciousness itself is generated. Now, whatever this stuff outside consciousness is that is supposed to generate consciousness, it is by definition unknowable to us because everything that we could know appears in consciousness. So this theory it will never be more than theory. And not only that, it appeals to the existence of a substance, namely matter, that we believe exists outside consciousness. Nobody has ever seen it. Nobody's ever found it. Nobody will ever find it or could ever find it. Moreover, we believe that this unknowable substance called matter gives rise to the only thing that we ever know, which is consciousness. Now, if that's not upside down thinking, what is? If that's not convoluted, what is?
I agree. It's
why
theoretical.
not? The only reason for, sorry to interrupt you, the only reason to imagine the existence of something outside consciousness would be if we couldn't explain our experience, reality, the world, using only the raw data of our experience, namely consciousness, but we can. So just using Occam's razor, should we not stick to the facts of our experience, namely consciousness, and only appeal to the existence of a substance called matter if we can't explain reality in terms of consciousness only? And it turns out we can very elegantly.
I think that's a reasonable approach, and maybe this comes down to personal, how convinced one is, because I guess I've not been convinced that we can explain everything in a consciousness-only picture. And as I mentioned, just the simple thing of something like the seeming dependence of visual experience on having eyes, and the way eyes seem to be made of smaller kind of systems that we have no reason to believe are conscious, or just trying to think of I would say I am a system that is conscious, whereas a cup is not conscious. In the way you think about this, can you talk about things being conscious, or I guess if there's only consciousness?
James, would you? Can we agree that our mind, an individual mind, is like a mini field of consciousness, and that within a mind, a thought arises, and the thought is made out of the mind in which it appears. Would you agree? I mean, the thought is not put into the mind from the outside. It's made of mind stuff, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Can we? Is that a reasonable thing? Now, the thought itself is not conscious. For instance, a thought is not listening to our conversation. The thought appears in your conscious mind. It is made of your conscious mind, but it is not itself conscious. That goes for every thought, every feeling, every sensation, and every perception you have ever had. It is within everybody's experience that all their experience, let's take thoughts, that their thoughts appear in their mind, made of their mind, but a thought itself is not conscious. So here we have evidence that something can appear in consciousness, made of consciousness, but not itself be conscious. Now, how do you know that exactly the same is not true of the cup? That it is also an appearance in consciousness, made of consciousness. It only appears to be a physical object because you are viewing it from a localized perspective. It is that perspective that confers objectivity on the apparent object. But this cup, which you're quite rightly saying is not conscious, can still be made of consciousness, just like the thought that arises in your mind is not conscious, but it is made of consciousness.
I think you're right. In a situation like a dream, as you say, the things that arise are not conscious. The appearances are just appearances in consciousness. And so I think this just brings us back to our different ontologies, because I'm not saying consciousness is conscious. I'm saying physical systems can be conscious, rather than in a consciousness only picture. Yeah, you wouldn't say that an appearance.
But James, it's not your experience that your body, the physical systems are conscious. Your experience is that consciousness is conscious, that awareness is aware. So where do you get the idea that physical systems are conscious from?
As you say, not from experience at all, but from the kind of philosophical and scientific investigation of the world, trying to fit everything together in a way that makes sense. So, as I said, something like the physical dependency of specific sensory experiences on the brain and sense organs, to me, suggests a direction of causality where the contents of consciousness, at least, are dependent on what we call these physical things like sense organs. And I think my honest feeling is it hangs together more elegantly if I posit that there is that reality isn't made of consciousness, it's made of something. The word matter is something I'm not that keen on, because it's something, as you say, deeply mysterious, something we can never know directly. But if you entertain the idea, you say, well, could we be in a situation where there was this unconscious process happening, and then at some point it formed certain patterns that became conscious? To me, I say, well, yeah, that to me it seems plausible. I can't show you it directly, but that seems to be what's happened. I don't think of the Big Bang as having the same kind of conscious experiences that I have. It just seems so I agree that I can't prove it. In the same way, I'm not a solipsist. I can't prove that you don't have experience. If we just confine ourselves to what we know directly through our own experience, we end up with limited.
No, it's very important not to misrepresent what I'm not suggesting that I'm not a solipsist. This is important, because what this consciousness only ontology that I'm suggesting is often put down by people who relate it to solipsism, and solipsism is obviously an absurd point of view from either of our ontologies. But it's important to clarify that what I'm not suggesting that all there is to the world, the universe, is an appearance in my own individual mind. That would be solipsism.
Right. Yeah.
Only my individual mind exists. Nobody else exists in the world. Nothing. It's just the contents of my mind. That is a position of madness. I think you and I would both agree on that. What I'm suggesting is that everything is appearance in a universal consciousness, and that each of our individual minds are localizations of that universal consciousness, made only of that in that universal consciousness, made only of that universal consciousness, from whose limited perspective its own activity appears as the universe. just as does the dreamed world. And the dreamed world only appears to the dreamed character that we seem to be in the dream through their eyes. Physical eyes are necessary. The dreamed character, the one that perceives the dreamed world, needs their eyes to see, need their ears to hear. But when we wake up, we realize that it wasn't their physical eye, physical ears that were hearing. What appeared as physical eyes were just how this localization of consciousness appears from another point of view.
And so in this picture, what we're experiencing right now is very similar to a dream. Is that right? It's in the same way that in a dream, everything that appears is made of consciousness. That's what's happening.
It's similar to a dream, except that when we have a dream, when we have a dream at night, our mind localizes itself as a single point of view within its own dream, the dreamed character that we seem to become. I would suggest that universal consciousness is, in a sense, dreaming or imagining the universe. In other words, the universe is its activity, but it has the capacity to localize itself as numerous points of view within its own dream. And every sentient being is one such localized perspective within universal consciousness, made of universal consciousness, from whose perspective or through whose agency it perceives its own activity as a universe of the reality of everyone and everything. What we call it, or what we think it is made of, in the end, it doesn't matter. You may call it whatever I may call it. In the end, it doesn't matter, because we both agree, and this is why I'm very glad, James, that we spoke mostly about our internal experience and just briefly touched on this at the end, but didn't get into an argument about this, because in the end, the nature of reality cannot be named for reasons we said earlier. Language has evolved to describe the parts. So it's best to leave it unnamed. Then there's no argument. But whatever you call it, and whatever I call it, the implications are the same. Namely, there is a single reality. And all that is necessary is to understand this, to feel this, and to lead a life to the best of our ability that is consistent with this felt understanding. And I think on that, I think we completely agree.
We completely agree. Yeah, there's so much we agree, and to get hung up on the language of a particular intellectual model of understanding this is really not the thing to spend our time on.
I'm less and less inclined these days. I noticed that we started off this conversation on a different tack, and I thought, oh, that's nice. We're not going to. And then at the end, you introduced it, which was quite right that you did, but in a very nice way. And I'm glad that it so often those conversations lead to conflict and disagreement.
Yeah.
But I'm very glad that even though we may name the ultimate reality differently, the importance is we both feel it and lead a life that is consistent with its implications to the best of our abilities. So I'm less and less inclined to be drawn into debates, which often degenerate into arguments about this, and miss the essential point, which is usually shared by both parties.
Exactly. Yeah. No, this is